Boxing truth here. Nonito Donaire, the current WBO super bantamweight champion, is no longer interested in fighting no-name opponents and has called out Rigondeaux for a rematch. Now, Donaire, there has been much to talk about him for the past couple of years, ever since he received a devastating knockout loss to Nicholas Walters in his last fight at the featherweight division limit. Ever since that knockout loss, he's been rehabilitating himself, taking on obscure opposition, sea-level fighters, feasting and toying with these guys. However, he went life and death with one of his most recent fights against Cesar Suarez, a guy he shouldn't have went life and death with, and perhaps raised a lot of questions on whether Donaire is still an elite-level fighter. Won the fight, picked up a vacant strap for a WBO at super bantamweight, and he made easy work of Zolt Badak, his most recent opponent. My bad, I can't pronounce his name. And he had a good showing. He still showed flashes of brilliance in the ring. Very sharp with his punches. Throws a lot of single shots, counter shots, especially with his hook. Very dangerous to attack Donaire, especially when he was in his prime. Before the Rigondeaux fight, he was really showing that his trademark skills, which is if you attack him, you best be sure to keep your hands up, especially when you throw a straight right hand, an overhand right to Donaire, because he counters straight away with a hook. He punches with you. That's what makes Donaire very dangerous, especially when he was in his prime before the losses and knockout loss to Nicholas Walters. He's shown flashes of it in his fights. And against Cesar Suarez, when he picked up the vacant strap last year, he was dominating at first, was displaying his skill set, the speed, the counter-punching ability, was just outclassing him the first half of the fight, and then all of a sudden he went life and death with him, struggled. Even though the judges' scorecard don't indicate that, it was a very tough fight for Donaire. So now Donaire, after 4 fights, rehabilitating himself against lower-level competition, sea-level fighters, Donaire is now ready at the age of 33 to see where he's at in his career and if he can still compete with the top fighters at 122 pounds. Now, he called out Rigondeaux for a rematch, which is a fight I wouldn't mind. Donaire has won 4 straight fights since the knockout loss to Walters, has picked up a strap, and Rigondeaux, ever since he beat Donaire, has done jack shit. I mean, he's lost all the momentum he's received from that fight. He's only fought, let's see, how many times he's fought since Donaire? 1, 2, 3. He's fought 4 times. Fought once last year. Had a shitty fight against Obeko. Bored everybody to death. HBO hasn't put him back on ever since. That's not on the pay-per-view platform. Bored everybody to death in his last fight. I'm pretty much this close. I'm like almost done talking about Rigondeaux. He's done nothing. Hasn't done himself any favors with the decisions he's made his career. Pulling out of fights with lower level opponents like Jazza Dickens because he couldn't get his visa. Didn't apply for one or whatever. He hasn't fought any top-level opponents at 122. Ever since he beat Donaire, who was the pound-for-pound one of the best fighters in the world when they fought. But it's been just a bad following of fights against a bunch of nobodies, guys that don't belong in a ring with Rigondeaux. Guys moving up from bantamweight like Joseph Obeko had 3 losses coming out of 6 fights coming into that fight. Fighting guys in the top 50, 60 in the world. And yet Rigondeaux is still rated in the pound for pound list, and he's done jack shit in over 3 years. Now when it comes to the rematch, Rigondeaux needs it. He needs Donaire's name. Is it as interesting as the first fight? No. Is it as lucrative as the first fight? No. That fight was at the Radio City Music Hall in New York. Both received pretty damn good paydays for that fight. But now both guys have lost momentum. Donaire's been knocked out and he moved back down to super bantamweight, picked up a strap, but hasn't looked himself in some of his fights, especially against Cesar Juarez. He looked good in the fight today, considering the opponent he had in front of him, though. Guy who didn't belong in the ring with him. But Donaire, he was fighting in the Philippines for this fight, and a pretty good damn crowd turned up. Over 25,000 people showed up at the Cebu City Sports Complex in the Philippines. Pretty damn good amount of people showed up to watch that fight, which was a pretty much a predetermined outcome. But will the rematch happen? I have my doubts when it comes to that rematch. Rigondeaux, I haven't heard anything about his return, if he's going to fight anytime soon. He's still with Rock Nation. But they have yet to do any type of business with Top Rank, which is the current promoter of Donaire still. They still promote him. And Top Rank might have other plans, and it might not involve a Rigondeaux fight. I mean, is HBO even interested in that fight? Are they interested in putting Rigondeaux back on their regular airwaves, on the regular HBO platform? Do they feel Donaire can beat Rigondeaux this time? Because I'm pretty sure HBO has no interest in Donaire if in Rigondeaux if he wins again. So it's hard to say if that fight's even gonna happen. He also called out Carl Frampton Donaire, but Frampton's moving up in weight to fight Leo Santa Cruz, so that fight's not gonna happen. What are the fights out there for Donaire at 122? There's a Scott Quigg fight. That fight was negotiated last year, but for some reason it didn't pull through. They couldn't come to an agreement. Perhaps that fight's next in the cards. Very possible. Who else? Trying to figure out who else Donaire could fight. That's at 122. The top four, it's Frampton, it's Frampton, then it's Rigondeaux, then it's Quigg, and then it's Donaire. So I just don't see how possible the fight will happen. But looking at the list, the names, any type of fights that could generate good money for Donaire for his next fight, perhaps Rigondeaux is the guy for a rematch. Perhaps it's doable, perhaps it's financially feasible. But you never know Rigondeaux. He's always asking for ridiculous type purses when he doesn't have much economic value at the negotiating table, doesn't bring much revenue, doesn't bring a fan base. So it's always hard to negotiate a deal. Donaire also called out Hugo Ruiz, but he's a WBC belt holder, but I'm not sure if he's with Heyman. So that could be out of the question, because he's been on 2 PBC shows recently against Julio Ceja. They both split their bouts, and now Hugo Ruiz is the WBC champion at 122. But I want to see Donaire back in a big fight. I think the Rigondeaux rematch makes sense, considering the names available at the moment, 122 pounds. There's really no big money fights there for Donaire outside of a Rigondeaux rematch or a Scott Quigg fight. But Quigg doesn't have a belt. He's coming off a loss. How big of a fight is that? Is it bigger than a Rigondeaux rematch? Where would they put the fight? Would it be in America? Elsewhere? Can Rock Nation and Top Rank come to an agreement for a fight, for a rematch, it really does make sense. I wouldn't mind the fight. Does Donaire have more of a chance? I would say yeah, but I mean Donaire has his excuses for why he lost the first fight. He's felt that he says that he took Rigondeaux lightly, underestimated him, and it could be he could be truthful when he says that, but it's a weak excuses. He lost the fight, but before that fight happened, he was saying that Rigondeaux wasn't much to him, that he wasn't impressed with Rigondeaux, and that he thought he wasn't on his level. But we all saw what happened that night. Donaire got schooled, but he did drop Rigondeaux in the fight. He showed that he can drop him. He's got some power. He's still very sharp with his punches, still very sharp with his counters. Rigondeaux hasn't done much of anything ever since that fight. Has fought a bunch of no-name guys ranked out of the top 30 even. Hasn't looked good in some of his fights. Got dropped a couple of times in one of his recent fights. Looked terrible against Rion Francisco. No explosion, no combinations, no power. So Donaire, he might have looked at that fight and said, perhaps this guy is past his prime. In Rigondeaux, he's past his best. He's not as explosive. He doesn't look as good. He's not fighting as often. He's inactive. He's not as sharp. Maybe I can take him in a rematch, knowing what I have in front of me, knowing his style. He had 12 rounds of experience with Rigondeaux in the ring. Lost the majority of the rounds. Got cleanly outboxed and got hurt. Almost stopped in the last round of their fight. But it could be a different fight. Rigondeaux is a lot older, inactive, pulling out of fights, not fighting anybody in the top 10. All sorts of excuses for not fighting the best at 122, 126. Yeah, he's called out for Frampton and Quigg, but those guys were busy signing to fight more lucrative fights, like against each other. And now Frampton's moving up to fight Santa Cruz, which is a big fight. Much bigger fight compared to a Rigondeaux. So he's off to bigger and better things. Scott Quigg recently called out Rigondeaux. He said he's willing to fight him for one of the vacant straps, which I believe is WBA, recently vacated by Colin Frampton. So Rigondeaux is in demand all of a sudden by some of the top names at 122 pounds. Now will Rigondeaux pull the trigger on these fights? Will he take these fights for the money that's the purses that being offered to him? Perhaps it won't be the purse that he truly desires, but it'll be big, significant fights. He can get a title fight with Scott Quigg if he wants for a vacant strap, or he can get a rematch with Nonito Donaire for a WBO strap at 122 pounds that was also recently stripped from Rigondeaux. And now Donaire holds the same exact belt that he lost to Rigondeaux in their fight over 3 years ago. But I say, why not? Let's make this rematch happen. No other fight out there makes sense for either guy. Donaire has something to prove. He feels that he can do a lot better in a rematch. Feels that he's still the better fighter of the two between Rigondeaux and Donaire. It's a much more intriguing fight considering everything that's happened since then. Both guys have lost momentum, but one guy hasn't been fighting the best, hasn't been fighting any threats, has been losing his belts outside the ring, inactivity, being stripped of his titles for not in the ring title for not fighting a top 5 opponent in the past couple of years. While Donaire, he's been taking on challenges, moving up in weight, winning belts, getting knocked out by Nicholas Walters, and then rehabilitating himself and picking up a vacant strap. So just a complete contrast of the two guys' careers ever since their fight. Donaire has been a lot busier. He's fought 2, 3, 4, 5. He's fought 6 times. 7 times ever since his fight with Rigondeaux. He's been a lot more active, has fought a lot more names. Has not looked good in some fights. He looked terrible against Darchinian. He had some moments against Walters, went life and death with Cesar Suarez, but he still has some left. But I know he's a little past his prime. Doesn't throw as many punches. Still very dangerous with his counter hook. It's not doesn't possess devastating power, but he can hurt you with it, especially if you don't see it coming. I would rather see Donaire get that opportunity with the rematch with Rigondeaux, but Top Rank may have other plans. They might want, knowing that Donaire is at the twilight of his career at 33 years of age, they might want him to pass the torch to one of their younger fighters on the up and coming, and maybe match him with Jesse Magdaleno and pretty much end one career and start another career in Jesse Magdaleno. Hopefully that scenario doesn't play out. I'd rather see Donaire get a big fight, a rematch with Rigondeaux, see if he can right that wrong, and then he can move on to perhaps bigger and better things in his career, whatever is left of it. This is Boxing Truth. I'm out.